Daniel Ellsberg is a former U.S. military analyst employed by the Rand Corporation who precipitated a national political controversy in 1971 when he released the Pentagon Papers, a top-secret Pentagon study of U.S. government decision-making about the Vietnam War. He has written many books and has been the subject of documentary films. Perhaps no single whistleblower has made such a heroic contribution in exposing the real aims of U.S. foreign policy and war planning. His recent book is entitled The Doomsday Machine: Confessions of a Nuclear War Planner. Here's how Ellsberg describes the book's objective. The hidden reality I aim to expose is that for over 50 years, all-out thermonuclear war, an irreversible, unprecedented, and almost unimaginable calamity for civilization and most life on Earth, has been, like the disasters of Chernobyl, Katrina, the Gulf oil spill, Fukushima, and before these, World War I, a catastrophe waiting to happen on a scale infinitely greater than any of these. And that is still true today. No policies in human history have more deserved to be recognized as immoral or insane. The story of how this calamitous predicament came about and how and why it has persisted over a half a century is a chronicle of human madness. Whether Americans, Russians, and other humans can rise to the challenge of reversing these policies and eliminating the danger of near-term extinction caused by their own inventions and proclivities remains to be seen. I choose to join with others in acting as if that is still possible. Now joining us in Berkeley, California is Daniel Ellsberg. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
I had enormous respect for you before I read this book, and you truly scared the hell out of me with this book, and I think it's just what we need. First of all, before we start going through some of the main historic points of the book, for a lot of people, this is the nuclear danger, the idea of a potential catastrophe. We're past that. The Soviet Union is gone. We're no longer supposedly in a Cold War, although some people seem to want to start another one. Talk a bit about what you think is the current danger and why this history matters so much.
As you say, we are unfortunately reproducing some of our own worst past history of the last century. The Cold War, I think, was itself a catastrophic policy course since it resulted in the creation of two doomsday machines, US and Russia, each of them capable of near extinction of human life, and together, coupled by hair triggers, form a mutual doomsday machine that's even far worse than twice as dangerous as one of them alone. So that was a terrible price of the Cold War, whatever else can be said in favor of the policies or in support of the idea that it was inevitable, which I used to believe and which I think is very deceptive. But we see people now without the same ideological conflict that could be appealed to before with the Soviet Union or with Russia. Without that, we see them demonizing the Russian great power atrocities in the same way that we characterize the Soviet Union in various ways. And both of those amounted to this basic premise, that what we were facing in Russia or the Soviet Union was Hitler with nuclear weapons. Now there was a plausibility to that because Stalin was as ruthless as Hitler toward his own people, essentially, perhaps killed more communists than Hitler did over the course of decades, and was in occupation of Eastern Europe, which was presented to us plausibly, but I think wrongly, as simply a stepping point toward trying to occupy all of Western Europe and achieve world domination in some form. And the idea then was that anything was justified in opposing this, deterring it, preventing this from happening, and protecting the freedom of other people in the world. And that's how it was presented to us. Anything meant anything, because in this case, the nuclear scientists had presented us, and the labs and the corporations that produce these weapons and are still producing them, had presented us with weapons that were capable of irreversible effects on human civilization.
You talk about the essentially a mythology of whatever Stalin was domestically. Stalin was not a Hitler, was not poised to try to take over the world.
As I said, Stalin and Hitler were very comparably ruthless, murderous, killed many millions of people, tens of millions even. But the idea that Stalin was reckless, expansionist, determined, by military means to take over a large part of the world, which Hitler was wrong. It was plausible, as I said, he looked enough like it, and that was the ideology that I was brought up in a way, since I was 17 or so, right at the beginnings of the Cold War. But I think in retrospect, that was not only wrong, but essentially our intelligence people always knew that was wrong. That Stalin, in terms of expansion, was a much more conservative figure and understood very well that he was number two in the world, that he was not vying to take over the world from the United States, did not want war with the United States. And by the way, I think that's true now. The expansionist tendencies of Putin are being enormously exaggerated. And why? I think for much the same reason, that it justifies a $1.7 trillion expansion, which is very hard to justify in the war on terror, let's say. We needed the war on Russia still.
You're talking about the budget over 30 years?
The 1.7 trillion is a 30-year budget for the U.S.
For the nuclear program.
On nuclear, a complete, what they call modernization, but replacement of our ICBMs, our submarines, our ballistic missile submarines, our attack submarines, and our bombers. All the aspects of what we call the nuclear triad, which is simply a marketing device for selling weapons to the Defense Department and to our allies. So only Russia provides a rationale for this defense mobilization, these budgets year after year. I think we found in the first part of this century, you just can't justify new Trident submarines or new ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, against ISIS or against Afghanistan, really. Only Russia will do. Someday, perhaps China will present itself as a military power that needs this kind of mobilization on our part. Not now. So it's Russia or nothing. And I think when they realize that it's very hard to run an empire, and that's what presidents do, without an enemy, allegedly hostile power as big as Russia and as widespread as Russia, with a lot of targets to buy vehicles to destroy them with. It's a necessary component of our political economy, I would say, and of our alliances, which provide us our hegemony even in the capitalist world. So our policy has rested really since the beginning of the Cold War and since the formation of NATO on using as an instrument of policy the threat to destroy civilization or most of humanity, backed up by the capability to do it, keeping it modern, keeping it up to date, replacing old weapons that were finishing their production lines with new weapons to produce more profits and jobs and votes. Our economy, to a considerable extent, depended on this process of peacetime armament or Cold War armament indefinitely, as though we were preparing for war indefinitely, and that's what we have been doing. I don't think that any of our presidents wanted a nuclear war at all, possibly, but they did want to threaten it. They wanted to base alliances on that threat and that promise, and to prepare for it. And the preparing was not a cost, really. It was a benefit to General Dynamics and Raytheon, Lockheed, Boeing, who to this day, as I say, depend for most of their sales and their profits and their jobs on new weapons, despite the fact that we've had the ability to blow up most humanity for over half a century.